Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and economic growth and opportunity across America. This week, I'm recording this episode from the NATO Industry Forum held in Stockholm, Sweden. I'm honored to have Moody's Chief Strategy Officer, David Platt, on the show. Dave and I had just completed 2 days participating and presenting to NATO, representing our industries of global integrated risk management and technology, respectively. We got to know each other over the last few weeks as we prepared and shared notes together to get ready for the forum. We were asked by NATO to provide a perspective on how they can future-proof and protect their supply chains. Dave highlighted the importance of NATO getting the right data, analytical solutions, and insights to help decision makers identify opportunities and manage the risks of doing business with others. In this episode, we discussed Dave's career that led to his current position as the Chief Strategy Officer. Many of our listeners will relate when Dave talks about that day in 2009 during the global financial crisis when unplanned external events would change his career direction and open up a door that would take him to the top of his industry. Lastly, he provides great insights into the success of Moody's and the impact of generative AI within his industry. This is a great episode for anyone that wants to understand the crossroads of supply chain and the power of data. I hope you enjoy. Hey, David, how you doing?
Troy, how you doing? It's good. It's been a fun day, a fun couple of days.
Oh, yeah. David and I've had the opportunity over the last couple of days. We're here in Stockholm, Sweden, and getting an opportunity to work with NATO and had the honor and privilege to serve with you going through a panel discussion on supply chain. And as we talked more and more through that process, I realized a lot of similarities in the way we kind of take on tasks and the preparation. I started looking over as you and I were meeting kind of leading up to this virtually, and then we get in person and we both pull out our preparation notes, and everybody else around us got like a 3x5 card, and we've got like a stack of stuff. And I'm like, you and I looked at each other, and it's like, it's going to get down to a card, but you have to kind of go wide before you can kind of pull it all in. So, David, I really appreciate you being on the show today. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. I was going to say, the first thing is when I was talking to Troy just literally less than a week ago, we were sort of, thinking about how we were going to get together at NATO here in Stockholm, and pulling things together and trying to figure out how we were going to get our story straight. But the first thing I realized when I talked to you was this is a person that I understand, and this is a person who likes to dig in and make sure that they're ready to go. But as we sort of think about our stories and the meritocracy discussion, the first thing I'd sort of say is Stockholm is a long way from Brooklyn, New York.
Dave, would you mind providing us where you grew up and a little bit about your background?
I'm from, in terms of some background, way back, I was born in Brooklyn, New York. We actually went from Brooklyn to California to Philadelphia. So I was raised outside of Philadelphia in a town called Ballackinwood. Frankly, a nice little town, nothing special, off of what's called City Line Avenue. One of my first formative parts of my education was actually learning how to make some money. And my first job was I shoveled snow. And actually, my mother and my stepfather got me a Sears Craftsman snow shovel. Now, their idea, of course, was I was going to shovel the walk. My idea was, well, after I shovel the walk, I can shovel everybody else's. And so maybe a harbinger of things to come when I would go out and I had a snow shoveling route, it quickly dawned on me that I had no idea how to price my time. And, this is years before I knew anything about, finance or present value or cost of capital. But I did know that the grown-ups whose walks I was shoveling, clearly their time was more valuable than mine. So I quickly figured out who were the folks. I said, you should pay me what you think it's worth. And I quickly figured out who were the cheapskates and who were the folks that valued what I was doing. I loved school. I loved math. I loved science. I loved history. And so I went to UC Berkeley. Initially, I was actually studying science. I thought about being a doctor. I actually thought about being a surgeon. And I actually worked for the Veterans Administration, the Department of Neurology at UCSF, doing work on spinal cord research. But one day I realized, you know what? I don't like blood. I'm not really into, some of these hard sciences like organic chemistry. I thought, it's time to do something else. I thought, well, I'll do political science and economics, and which I loved.
During your time at UC Berkeley, did you have any mentors or professors that influenced your perspective that may have impacted how you approached your future career?
I worked for a professor in the Department of Political Science, and he was getting tenure, and he was doing a book on liberal protectionism, so trade. And I think at the time I was 19 years old, and I'm not sure I really understood exactly what liberal protectionism meant, but it did dawn on me that there were countries and they had trade policies and they were trying, protect home field advantage and so forth. And so it sort of started to stick in my mind, the business world and what that was about. And then I had a professor, his name was Peter Jones, and he was an amazing man. He had been in the Peace Corps. He had served in the Kennedy Johnson administration, and then he was an attorney and worked for W.R. Grace and actually in Latin America. And he was an inspirational person for me because really opened my eyes to, the world beyond America, but the role and the importance of the United States as a beacon of democracy, of freedom of speech, of fiscal discipline, encouraging growth, encouraging stability, and encouraging actually civil dialogue. And he has also said to me something that never left me, and I still say this to this day, which was think global and act local. And that was another sort of focal point of my career and how I thought, because it introduced in my mind the role of service.
After you finished your undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley, did you go straight to graduate school?
I got a job doing commercial real estate in California. So I'm at Berkeley. The California real estate market was booming. And the first job that I had was an internship doing strategic planning for a mortgage banking company. I did that while I was in college. I graduated. I stayed doing that. And then after about 2 years, and I think I was about 22, 23, I realized, you know what? I studied political science. I studied economics. I need to go to business school. And I've always been, tried to make what I thought were good decisions. I applied to 2 schools. I applied to the University of Wisconsin, and I thought about doing the MBA and actually a PhD in real estate there. And I applied to the University of Chicago, and I at a business school. And it was very interesting. I didn't get accepted. I got accepted to Chicago. I didn't get accepted to Wisconsin. And I thought, well, what is that all about? I thought I would just look into it. And it turns out that actually someone had made a math error when they calculated my GPA. It was just literally a mistake. And the dean said, oh, well, you can come. But in any event, he said, but, if you've been accepted to Chicago, you go to Chicago. So I go to Chicago. I put myself through school. So I worked through school. I worked for the Chicago Housing Authority, trying to figure out how to deal with subsidized housing and better economic outcomes for the community by considering different types of mixes of real estate. I was a grader for corporate finance. And then I said, I want to do something that marries finance and earning a living with trying to help others. And so I ended up getting a job at John Nuveen & Co. in their investment banking group, doing infrastructure and public power. And I did that during the rest of graduate school. So I was going to school, I was working there, and I was working on a deal. And I love deals, which has spent a lot of my life doing them. Actually doing a financing to build a giant waste system and transfer stations. And this was one where there were 20 different communities. It was called the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County. All of a sudden it comes back to me. And the thing about it was, what was hard was there was a project you had to get everybody aligned. And that had been fairly elusive. But somehow, I worked with the senior folks, and we figured out a way to bring all these folks together. And I think that maybe that was a harbinger of things to come.
So what did you do after you completed your graduate school? And were there any other credentials or certifications required or needed in your field?
I had the opportunity actually to go work for Fidelity Investment in Dallas, Texas, as a credit analyst. And because I liked banking, but I thought, okay, I'll go to the buy side. That sounds interesting. And so I went to Fidelity, to the research company, and so I was a fixed income analyst. So there I had to get my CFA, my Chartered Financial Analyst designation, and I learned credit. I did municipal finance, which I thought be something good to help other folks. I learned about corporate finance and financing and analyzing credit of corporations, of sovereign nations, finance companies. And then it was actually the beginning of the structured finance period. I learned structured finance, and I worked with all these attorneys. So I was actually about 28 years old. I finished the CFA. And then, this odd situation happened. They said, you know what? We're going to move everybody from Dallas, Texas to Merrimack, New Hampshire. And I was like, okay, Merrimack, New Hampshire. They said, well, it's pretty close to Boston. So I go up to Merrimack, New Hampshire, and said, you know what? This isn't really that close to Boston. I mean, it's not exactly a hop, skip, and a jump. And it was pretty cold, and it was pretty gray, and it was pretty rainy. And I said, you know what? I'm not sure I'm doing this. And they all looked at me and said, well, we'll let you be a portfolio manager, which, everybody wants to be a portfolio manager on the buy side, certainly at Fidelity, and this was in the 90s. I said, I'm going to go do something totally different. I want to do investment banking. So here I am. I'm an analyst. I'm in fixed income. And, it's been 5 years now working for Fidelity, which I loved. I mean, I love the idea of being a fiduciary. I love the idea of having essentially a sacred trust to invest people's hard-earned money and protect it. But I thought, I'm going to do something totally different. I interviewed with this company called DLJ, Donaldson, Lufkin, Generative, which was sort of the successor to Drexel, Burnham, Lambert with the high-yield leverage finance. And they said, well, you can work here, but you understand that we can't take the average of a portfolio manager and an associate and get like a VP. You're starting from the bottom. And you do realize that we kind of work, like 100 hours a week. I'm like, yeah, I could do that. So in any event, in April 1997, I moved to New York City. I started working for DLJ, and then I quickly gravitated towards mergers and acquisitions. And within mergers and acquisitions, there's sort of execution people and there's industry coverage people, and there's blends of both. I turned out to be what's called an execution banker. we would go, win the business. And then, a lot of work had to get done. And in fact, I specialized for a long time in selling companies, corporate divestitures, these sort of messy, what they call a divisional carve out of companies. Sometimes it was a troubled division. They decided it wasn't on strategy anymore. And it was across all industries. So I was going from area to area and trying to work with folks to help solve some very complicated situations. But I had some really interesting assignments. I did one thing for a multinational paper company, and the head of corporate development, and he says to me, if the fee to the bank is not enough incentive, if this transaction doesn't get done, this paper mill is going to close, and a couple thousand people are potentially going to lose their job. And suffice to say, that resonated. Now, I was going to give it my all no matter what, but I actually felt pretty good that this gentleman shared with me the real world implications on other people about what was going to happen if this didn't work out, and that increasingly became also a theme in my working career because I always there was always a job to be done, but there was always an implication to corporate strategy and how a strategy or a situation at a company where something had changed, and sometimes it wasn't great. Other times it was actually wildly successful in the sense that, there were also really good news stories about why people were doing this particular M&A transaction. But I never lost sight of there were human beings, people associated with these decisions. In any event, DLJ got acquired by Credit Suisse First Boston. I always wanted to be doing work that I found interesting, that I enjoyed, and I wanted it to be with people who I liked or respected, learned from. Now, investment banking, frankly, was fairly rough and tumble, and it was a very hard apprentice business. But I did benefit considerably, and again, it was the deals that I like to work on were hard. They were not financings. These were M&A, mostly selling companies, and sometimes in some very tricky situations where a company had run into some sort of distress and they had to get something done. So I went from First Boston to Citigroup. I went then to Bank of America. I became a managing director in the mergers and acquisitions department at Bank of America. And then in 2007, I went to Deutsche Bank, and I was going there to help build a practice around divestiture work in the mergers and acquisitions department. And then the great financial crisis struck. And I was there for 2 years, and the world, frankly, fell at to hell in a handbasket. That was 2009, and someone came into my office and said, basically said, you're done. And it was a shock because my whole life I just assumed, shovel that snow, work hard, gain knowledge, get the job done, and everything would be fine. But the world wasn't fine. And it was at that point where I said, I didn't even know, sort of what kind of job would be next because, things were really bad in this country. They were really bad around the world. I mean, I talked to my wife and I said, all right, so I've been a portfolio, almost a portfolio manager on the buy side. I've been an M&A banker, and now it's a bit of a mess in the world. I'm going to try and figure out how to, to invest during this period of time, to do investment banking work myself during this period of time. And and it's funny because I was an execution banker, not what they was called a relationship banker per se, but I had relations because I always felt it was important, and I wanted to, just because I like people, to connect with people. And so I started calling up various folks, friends, companies I'd worked with, and I actually started getting work as sort of a investment M&A banker for hire, and I did that for almost 3 years. And in the midst of all this, I connected with Moody's Corporation. I loved Moody's, and it was sort of very ironic because some of my first friends when I did credit were at Moody's Corporation, and I thought, Moody's was a place where, it was helping the folks understand credit, and that, of course, I understood, and it was still a complicated time in Moody's history, clearly. But I started doing, M&A work for Moody's.
Can you go into detail a bit about what it was like at that time period working at Moody's and how the company has continued to grow and expand?
We're still getting out of the financial crisis. We have the rating agency. It was a time there was more regulation, but we started asking ourselves about, okay, so we're known and trusted for assessing credit risk, and actually, when you think about what the rating agency, what Moody's does, our legacy is that we're sort of we're a trusted gate for those who have capital and those who wish to consume it, use it, and there's a combination of sort of price discovery and understanding between the parties, because the party that's getting rated is willing to open itself up to real scrutiny. But in any event, we also realized that there was a portion of our business that we didn't control because it was subject to issuance. And so the company in 2007 had formed what's called Moody's Analytics. And so we embarked on a journey to think about adjacent risk areas where we could go. And that took us to multiple acquisitions. Notably, in 2017, we bought a company called Bureau van Dijk, which was one of the world's largest providers of sort of company and entity information, and we thought that it was a phenomenal business, and we thought it would be a platform to allow us to do more in small and medium-sized enterprise credit. But what it really provided us was we had all this company information and who owned them, and it became increasingly clear to us that what we had was a window on commerce. Sort of who is the company? What is their financial profile? Who actually owns them? So it started to open the aperture into considering, all manner of new opportunities. And we said, okay, the next thing we said, well, we know the companies, we know the entities, but what about sort of, people, politically exposed people? And so there was another opportunity to buy a company that had one of the world's largest databases on politically exposed people. And actually it had some artificial intelligence capabilities. And that began to further open the aperture around different risk understanding. And then we said, well, there's all these, the environmental social governance, sustainability, we have to have capabilities there. Why? Because our customers and our stakeholders were asking us about it. So how do you think about, ESG? Similarly, cyber. We started a journey over years around having the ability to talk about cybersecurity risk assessment. That ultimately led to our investment in a company called BitSight Technology, because people were trying to understand. It became clear that the risk of cyber intrusion and ransomware and so forth was another very important issue that would affect commerce. We further extended. We thought about climate risk and physical risk. So we were talking about carbon and decarbonization and net zero considerations around ESG, but there was all the science around extreme weather, and we thought, that's something that that's another area that we should look into, which we did, and we acquired another wonderful company and wonderful people called RMS. There are many of those stories. We also developed our competencies and our capabilities in commercial real estate data and analytics. Why? Because commercial real estate analytics is related. Actually, there's physical risk characteristics. There's financial risk characteristics. There's banks. Banks hold them on their balance sheets. And we started to assemble what we characterize as sort of a crown jewel set of businesses that really, again, let you have an understanding of multiple risk classes: climate, cyber, structured finance, regulatory requirements for bank, our historical capabilities in credit and lending workflow. We made also, when we did the acquisition of RMS, that took us to insurance data and analytics, because that particular business served the insurance, the global insurance industry, and the richness of all the models and the catastrophic risk that, again, the heavy-duty modeling and the ability to bring empiricism to many of these questions about physical assets and different risk classes.
I was wondering if you could discuss your perspective of the approach to mergers and acquisitions at Moody's.
One of the wonderful things about Moody's and our approach to that sort of thing, which is we have some very sort of simple rules. So the first, when we look at a deal, is industrial logic. Is it about risk? Is it enriching our ability to provide our customers and our stakeholders sort of essential insights based on data and analytics? Two, obviously, we have to make sure that we're able to really bring something to the table. We have a synergy case, and our industry actually has gotten increasingly more valuable from a cash flow perspective, the unit economics of our business. And so things are expensive. So we have to make sure that we have synergies and a perspective on, we're really adding something to this so that we can earn an appropriate return. And we actually have very stringent requirements for how we look at transactions. And then third, due diligence. We're very careful. We're incredibly industrial about it, because fundamentally, you don't want to spend $100 and then find yourself with $1,000 problem, and that's being thorough. And this has been increasingly true, and again, a hallmark, or rather something important to me, which is, who are the people? The nice thing, one of the greatest things about what we've been doing as a company has been it's been people and culture, and centric valued. And in fact, of the things that I did when I actually became the chief strategy officer, was I got this group, my responsibilities, in addition to the mergers and acquisition, the corporate development program, I got what was called then Global Communications. And we we led, the group led, and here I'm an M&A guy trying to learn about sort of mission, voice, brand, marketing, which wasn't really what I had done most of my career. But we started with a project called the Mission, Vision, Purpose, Values Project. And it was fundamentally oriented to people. And so we actually redid our mission statement. And I was very excited about that because it was about sort of, who we were as human beings and what we thought our role in our business was, but our conduct. So our mission is to provide trusted insight and standards that help decision makers act with confidence, and acting confidence in a very complicated and interconnected world. But I go back to people, culture, vision, values, purpose, mission, and that's very important because people want to feel connected. I never on the deal thought of people as assets. I thought as people as colleagues. And in fact, all of the transactional work that we've done has been about bringing on new colleagues. So it's interesting, you mentioned earlier where, you have this set of capabilities and you have that set of capabilities and they overlap. So, of course we were taking out sort of appropriate, costs where there were some duplication, but largely, we brought in new colleagues that enriched the company. It was not about, cutting costs. We do cut costs and we have, our fiduciary duties, and obviously you want to use your money wisely. But when we approached M&A, it was always about a revenue-centric growth trajectory. We could enrich with our brand, with our sales capability, with our analytics, our methodological development, which we're known for. We could really change the vector of the revenue line and enhance profitability that way. That was largely how we've approached things.
Can I ask you a question? So you have the benefit of tenure with Moody's, as you've now taken us through the journey of building it piece by piece into a super viable company that has a lot of dimensions and a lot of areas of activity that you provide to the market. Where I think you and I have, again, kind of a complementary crossover, and we're here in NATO, or we're here in Stockholm, Sweden, and we're meeting with NATO, and one of the focus areas that got us together was looking at the changing view of the supply chain and how to future-proof supply chain. And obviously NATO, from the 50,000 foot level, is a facilitation organization. They really, in theory, don't have assets. They're an operator and a command and control mechanism, and they pull on different, 31 nations, and they use other, they don't specifically use other people's stuff, but they facilitate the best service that they can for their members under, the Washington Treaty of 1949. What we were asked to do was to come in, and what they're realizing is they are starting to have a significant amount of pain, a couple through underinvestment over years by a lot of their other member countries. And these current activities have been happening in Ukraine, and some of the different areas where NATO has stepped in to try to, facilitate outcomes in a fashion to kind of look out for their members. And what ends up happening is they're pulling all these countries through a process that they're not used to working together. And what I think I would bring to something like this is the view of, the underlying operations of how these supply chains work, down from process and systems in the businesses within industry, the deployment through logistics out in the battle area, and then the maintainability of things that get pulled off the battlefield from these different countries into an area of the organic industrial base that's got to get them ready to go back out to play again, per se, not in a joke, but just in a simple view. Your role, though, I thought was fascinating, is because, and I'm not only seeing this in a NATO fashion or within a Department of Defense in my federal portfolio, yeah, but I see it really across many industries, which is what they call supply chain risk management, or SCRM. And a lot of the different companies that I deal with, either and when I say companies, I'm talking partner companies like a Moody's
Right.
or Resolink or an Interos.
Yep.
These companies that have a product that needs mechanisms to bring data services in to help provide. And so my question to you, from a data strategy or from a strategy role for your organization, is when you look at some of the products that use your services, like a Resolink. I'll just use one as an example. A great company. I've had great experiences with them. But
Rather invested in by Vista Equity.
that's right. But I wonder, as somebody that's in the market and I'm pretty savvy tech-wise, do you as a strategy person, you've told the story of building out what I'll call the bingo card of Moody's, and you've started to black out all your squares. You're doing a great job. Do you find that the strategy to pick the next couple squares might be filled with other companies and you just don't want to go there? Or is it like a balloon and you just kind of keep pressing it and you're going to just kind of go where the demand is and you're looking for white spaces that don't have a product? And again, not getting into the details of your business, just in a generic sense, as a strategy officer for a company that's growing and having a great time, how do you square that from your perspective and your day-to-day trying to look across the market? Because technology is moving fast.
So as I say, our CEO, Rob Faber, had a vision around the opening the aperture around understanding essential risks that built off of credit, and we've been executing that for years now. And again, that journey to open the aperture and be able to provide global perspective, so we have a standard at scale. I said earlier, when we realized that we had company information, entity who actually owned them, we started to bring on other capabilities. Again, physical risk, understanding cyber, counterparty. It took us to supply chain. It took us naturally to the supply chain area, and the reason is that we had the ability to look very holistically. I mean, and our business, our internal culture is around collaboration, analytical, methodological rigor, and helping folks, companies, stakeholders connect the dots. And so that took us to supply chain. And there's two things you got to do. You've got the onboarding of suppliers, getting them in, which is sort of top down. Who are they? And making sure that they're fit for purpose, and that you actually sort of know who they are. And then there's the bottom up of the supply chain itself, and all the various tiers from the upstream raw materials all the way through the finished goods. That journey is actually around what we're calling the era of exponential risk. And the way that we talk about it is basically there's all manner of risks that intersect, that collide. In supply chain in particular, just the math of it, there are these exponential relationships between parties. And there's the math of it, there's the ability to connect the data, there's increasingly a tremendous amount of data that has to be ingested and analyzed, where we're using artificial intelligence, increasingly generative artificial intelligence, to to make those connections, to visualize the ecosystem of supply. It's looking at the ecosystem of commerce, of how goods and services and people are working. It's also defining a sort of a perimeter around where, what is not fit for purpose. You asked me about, sort of the opening the aperture further. Our fastest growing area is know your customer, know your supplier, counterparty, or decision solutions area. And, there's tremendous amount of richness there for us to go. And I think what we'll continue to do. And again, what's also very interesting is when I first joined the company, it was very much about, sort of the ratings business. If you wind forward now 10 years, our businesses are actually at parity. So our ratings business is around $3 billion of revenues as the crow flies, and as is our analytics business. And so we have actually tremendous critical mass in both businesses, and they're really self-reinforcing, because the foundation or the legacy, the reputation, the brand, the company has been credit risk, and then all the other supporting analytics around risk, decoding risk, which is trying to make sure that you understand the actual the dangers or the perils or the risks around you, so you're making informed decisions, which is often thinking about sort of the back and middle office, and then to unlocking opportunity. This is sort of our tagline, but it's relevant because it's also framing risk can people think of risk as like, oh my goodness, but there's also offensive risk where there's opportunity if you are making informed decisions. So our continued, we're very selective about how we transact, where we invest. And interestingly, our opportunities, particularly as we see the rise of generative artificial intelligence, has actually been more, there's many rich opportunities to partner, because the complexity of the interactions, the amounts of data that, whether, in the case of NATO, that NATO and the allied countries in the alliance are dealing with, the amounts of data that have to be ingested are just staggering. And so we're finding ourselves in a very interesting time where we're collaborating, we're partnering with other companies to bring the best of what we have in our risk, our data, our analytics, our methodological capabilities, also our brand, which stands for trust, and then and aligning with folks who have other capabilities around data management, the large language models, and also different industry vectors. So Troy, you and I are here. We're talking to the government. We've spent a whole bunch of time talking to a wonderful group. I mean, actually some of the the most important military leaders in the Western world, and asking us as industry to do more, faster, everywhere, and what they need, and then also the many of the folks from the defense industry, and listening to their unique issues, and we're able to. We don't necessarily have to acquire. We we product innovate. We're talking to our customers. We think of our customers as our partners. How can we serve them? And that, and whether it leads to M&A or joint ventures or venture investments, and we do all of these. The answer is that part of the history hasn't yet been written.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. It's definitely a bright future there. And, as you kind of look at, I sit on the side, so I see a lot of different companies, and I definitely Moody's is one I follow. And it was a pleasure today and the last couple of days of going through this process. In closing, as we kind of look at, you've got a unbelievable career. You've talked about your mentors that have brought you along. You've talked about your credentialing, your transitions. That day someone walks into your office and says, time's up, and you got right up, and look at you now. Any message, as we close in the next few minutes, that you'd like to leave with the listeners?
I would. First of all, the answer is, it's critical to do what you love. I actually tell my children this all the time, which is, I don't care what you do, but whatever you do, you really want to enjoy it. What's the expression? If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. That's not always true, but the answer is fundamentally, you really want to like what you do.
Yeah.
And I love to learn. And one of the things, again, I love about my sort of background, which at points feels a little all over the place, and the journey at Moody's, is I learn something new every day. And I actually have sort of conversations at a point where, you're digging deep, but you have to dig deeper. I've had some of these conversations, really getting into the weeds. Sometimes you're at 3 feet, sometimes you're at 30,000 feet. And going between altitudes is hard. It is very important to, at least for me, you want to work with people that you have a connection with, that you have true connection. Because I think that, you spend a lot of time with your colleagues, and, they're people, and they have their families, but they inform a great part of your life. So you want to be with people that you connect with, ideally that you care about, and then you want to be at a place where you really connect with what the company is doing. And I actually also, in my role at the company, I happen to be the president of the Moody's Foundation. And that was something I really wanted to do, because I'll do it. Like many things at Moody's, I'll do it. Sometimes it's sort of fix things up or find the right person. One of the things that I feel wonderful about is I have a terrific, wonderful colleague whose name is Christine Elliott, and she came in and is now the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, but she was the right person to be the steward of our global brand and our reputation, our voice, and our intersection with government, with the halls of power. So she looks after global communications, branding, marketing, corporate marketing, and our government, public, and regulatory affairs, and has built an amazing team. The foundation was actually a way, and in fact, it still the people report into corporate affairs, but it was actually my way to stay connected to folks around, trying to bring people together in the service of helping others.
That's awesome.
Which is a lot of what our company is doing. And then I suppose, look, we seem to be finding ourselves in a period of time where we go up, we go down, and we see like we have a lot of sort of highs and lows. And I suppose as a personal matter, it gets hard to get knocked down, but on the other hand, you just pick yourself up, and and I firmly believe, because it's not easy for anyone. It's a complicated world. It's complicated as an adult. It's complicated for our children. But the answer is, when one door closes, another door, opens, and you just seize the opportunity, and you just keep getting up, and off you go. And but fundamentally, it's about being with good people that you care about, mentorship, friendship, and stewardship. And that's how I sort of think about sort of my service and time in my career.
That's awesome, Dave. Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate, after 2 long days, taking your time to meet with me. And thank you for the service that you do provide through your foundation. I'm very active in a bunch of philanthropy and charities. My wife and I are. And so as hard as we're working and being on the road, to give back, I think those are ways we find joy in the world, and we realize what we're working for. So thank you so much, and I appreciate it. And I hope that you have a safe trip out tomorrow.
And same with you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.